The cold winter air swirled around the entrance of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City, where James Sullivan, the CEO of a massive pharmaceutical empire, arrived in his sleek black limousine. James, a man in his 50s with sharp blue eyes and a stern expression, had grown accustomed to the isolation of his wealth and power. Today, however, he wasn't here for business. He was here to distract himself from a gnawing loneliness that had settled deep within him after losing his wife, Catherine, 22 years ago. Inside the hospital, a conference on groundbreaking medical innovations was in full swing. James's presence wasn't just as a guest. He was the main sponsor of the event, part of his effort to support medical research and, perhaps subconsciously, an attempt to fill a void left by Catherine's death. As he moved through the crowded lobby, his gaze was drawn to a young woman dressed in nurse scrubs. Something about her caught his attention, making him stop mid-step. Her auburn hair, the graceful way she moved, even the way she tilted her head. It was all so hauntingly familiar. His heart raced. Could it be? No, it was impossible. The woman, Olivia Bennett, had just finished her shift and was preparing to leave when she noticed the well-dressed man staring at her intently. She felt a mix of curiosity and slight discomfort, unsure of why she was the focus of such intense scrutiny. As she turned to leave, James gathered his courage and approached her. "Excuse me," James began, his voice breaking the uneasy silence. "I couldn't help but notice. You look incredibly familiar." Olivia's eyebrows furrowed slightly, caught off guard by the directness of this stranger. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" she asked, her voice polite but cautious. James hesitated, trying to find the right words. "No, I don't think so. You just remind me of someone. Someone I lost a long time ago." Olivia's face softened. "I see. I'm sorry for your loss," she said genuinely, though still perplexed by the intensity of the man's gaze. Feeling embarrassed but determined to continue, James cleared his throat. "My name is James Sullivan. I sponsor this event." "Olivia Bennett," she responded, offering a warm but guarded smile. "I work here as a nurse." "Olivia? It's a lovely name," James remarked absently, as if trying to test how the name sounded in his mind. For a moment, they stood in awkward silence before Olivia spoke again. "Mr. Sullivan, I really should be going." "Please, call me James," he interrupted, a hint of desperation in his voice. "I know this may sound odd, but would you mind having a cup of coffee with me? Just a quick chat." Olivia's instinct told her to politely decline, but there was something earnest in James's demeanor that made her reconsider. "All right, just for a few minutes," she agreed, a touch of curiosity in her tone. In the small cafe within the hospital, James and Olivia sat across from each other. James couldn't help but study her face, every small detail resembling Catherine's. The same spark in her hazel eyes, the same faint freckles on her nose. "I know this is incredibly forward of me, but you really remind me of someone I love dearly," James confessed, his voice filled with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. "Was it your wife?" Olivia asked gently, sensing the depth of his pain. "Yes," he nodded, his voice breaking slightly. "Her name was Catherine. She disappeared 22 years ago, without a trace." Olivia looked down, suddenly feeling a strange connection with this man and his tragic story. "I can't even imagine how hard that must have been." James paused, then asked, "What about you, Olivia? Any family here?" Olivia sighed. "I was adopted as a baby. I never knew my biological parents, and I've been searching for them ever since." James felt a chill run down his spine. The timing, the resemblance. Could this be more than just a coincidence? The cafe's dim lighting added a sense of intimacy to their conversation, which flowed more easily as they shared personal stories. For Olivia, James was a stranger who showed genuine interest, something she rarely experienced. For James, Olivia was a reminder of a past that never let him rest, and perhaps a clue to a mystery that haunted him. As they said their goodbyes, James watched Olivia walk away, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. Could she be? He whispered to himself, unable to finish the thought. But the seed of doubt had been planted, an overwhelming feeling that fate had brought them together for a reason. The following morning, James found himself restless, unable to shake the encounter with Olivia from his mind. He paced the floor of his penthouse apartment, surrounded by old photographs of Catherine, all carefully framed and preserved. In every picture, Catherine's face seemed to echo Olivia's features, her delicate smile, the sparkle in her eyes. The resemblance was uncanny. "I have to know more," James muttered to himself, gripping the phone with determination. He dialed his assistant, Andrew, an efficient and discreet man who had worked for James for over a decade. "Andrew, I need you to arrange a private meeting for me with Olivia Bennett, the nurse I met yesterday at Mount Sinai." Andrew hesitated, sensing urgency in his employer's voice. "Of course, Mr. Sullivan. Shall I arrange it at your office?" "No," James responded quickly. "Somewhere more casual, perhaps a quiet restaurant." Later that afternoon, Olivia received the unexpected invitation. Unsure of what to think, she hesitated, then decided to accept. James's sincerity had intrigued her, and she sensed that there was more to his interest than mere nostalgia. The next evening, they met at a small, upscale bistro in Midtown Manhattan. Olivia arrived first, feeling a mix of anticipation and wariness. When James entered, he was visibly tense, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw her. As they sat down, the atmosphere shifted to a more personal tone. "Thank you for coming," James said earnestly. "You're welcome," Olivia replied, curiosity evident in her eyes. "I have to admit, I was surprised by your invitation." James nodded. "I know this may seem odd, but I can't ignore how similar you look to my wife. It's more than just physical resemblance. There's something familiar about you." Olivia shifted in her chair, feeling the weight of the conversation. "I understand, but I don't know how I can be connected to someone from your past. I don't know much about my own family." James leaned forward, eyes intense. "You mentioned you were adopted. Have you ever found any clues about your biological parents?" Olivia's face clouded with a mixture of hope and resignation. "I've tried. All I know is that I was left at an orphanage when I was a newborn. No birth records, no details about my parents. Just a note with my first name." James's heart pounded in his chest. "Olivia, do you mind telling me how old you are?" "I'm 22, she answered, not realizing the significance of her words. The room seemed to freeze around James. He leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. That's exactly the number of years since Catherine disappeared, he thought, trying to contain his shock. The timing was more than a coincidence. "Why do you ask?" Olivia inquired, noticing James's sudden change in demeanor. James struggled to choose his words carefully. "Olivia, I don't mean to intrude, but have you ever considered that your adoption might be connected to something bigger?" Olivia looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "There's a possibility, no matter how small, that you could be related to my wife's disappearance," James said slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "The timing, your age, it all matches." Olivia's eyes widened with shock, and she instinctively pulled back. "Mr. Sullivan, that's a huge assumption. How could I be connected to something like that?" "I know," James replied, trying to keep his composure. "But I've spent years searching for answers, and I can't let this go unexplored. I want to help you find your real parents, Olivia. It might even help me understand what happened to Catherine." Olivia's initial shock gave way to cautious interest. Despite the absurdity of the situation, she felt an unexpected sense of hope. "If there's even a small chance that you're right, I have to know. But how do we even begin?" James's voice softened. "We'll start by retracing your steps. We'll look into your adoption records, and I'll hire a private investigator to dig deeper." "I've already searched through some of those records," Olivia admitted. "But maybe there's more I haven't found yet." "Then let's do it together," James insisted. "I want to know the truth, for both our sakes." Olivia hesitated, her instincts telling her to be wary, but her heart urging her to take the chance. "All right," she agreed, her voice firm. "I'm in." The evening ended on a solemn yet hopeful note, a new understanding between James and Olivia beginning to form. James watched Olivia walk away, a mix of hope and fear brewing inside him. This search wasn't just about Catherine anymore. It was about the possibility that Olivia could be the missing link he never expected to find. A week had passed since James and Olivia had agreed to search for answers together. The atmosphere between them had shifted from awkward curiosity to a shared sense of purpose. James, determined and resourceful, quickly brought in Thomas Quinn, a seasoned private investigator with a reputation for uncovering hidden truths. Thomas arrived at James's office the next morning, a man in his early 50s with a grizzled beard and an air of quiet confidence. He sat across from James and Olivia, laying a thick notepad on the polished mahogany table. "Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Bennett," Thomas greeted with a nod. "I understand the situation is unusual. I'll need full access to both of your histories, whatever records you have, details about Catherine's disappearance, and Olivia's adoption papers. The smallest clue could be the key." Olivia, feeling both anxious and hopeful, handed Thomas a folder she had kept for years. It contained every piece of information she had about her past: a yellowed birth certificate, scant medical records, and a worn-out photograph of her as an infant, the only one taken before she was left at the orphanage. James handed over files he had collected from various investigators over the years, files that had become the lifeline of his obsession. "Everything's here, Thomas," James said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "I want you to dig deeper, connect every dot, no matter how insignificant it may seem." Thomas studied the documents silently for a moment, then looked up. "This might take a while, but I'll do my best. Just be prepared. These things have a way of uncovering truths that can be difficult to handle." Days turned into weeks, and the investigation pressed forward. In the meantime, James and Olivia found themselves spending more time together, both professionally and personally. They met frequently to review the progress, often in James's office or at cozy cafes around the city. One chilly afternoon, they met at a small cafe near Central Park. As they sat across from each other, Olivia shared a story from her childhood, a memory of feeling out of place at the orphanage, constantly wondering why she was abandoned. "I always thought there was something wrong with me," Olivia confessed, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "Like maybe I wasn't good enough for my real parents to keep me." James's eyes softened as he listened. "It's not your fault, Olivia. You deserve to know the truth from the beginning. Whatever we find, it's not a reflection of who you are now." Olivia smiled faintly. "It's strange, but talking to you about all this, it makes me feel less alone." James, momentarily caught off guard by the sincerity of her words, felt a connection deepening between them. "I feel the same," he admitted quietly. "It's been a long time since I had someone to talk to about Catherine. Somehow, you being here, it makes it easier." Before Olivia could respond, James's phone rang, breaking the moment. It was Thomas. "Mr. Sullivan, I have something," Thomas said urgently. "I found a lead in the adoption records." That evening, James and Olivia met Thomas in his dimly lit office. He had spread a series of documents across his desk. "I managed to track down more details about Olivia's adoption," Thomas began, pointing to one of the documents. "The records were filed under an alias, which is why the trail went cold for so long." "What alias?" James asked, his voice strained. "Elaine Baker," Thomas replied. "Whoever handled the adoption process used that name, likely to cover up the real identity of the mother." Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she absorbed the information. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," Thomas continued, "that whoever placed you in that orphanage didn't want you to be found. The name was deliberately chosen to obscure the truth. But there's more." He pulled out another document. "This is the original medical report from the orphanage. It confirms that the baby, Olivia, had been brought there just days after birth. But here's the shocking part. The baby's mother was listed as unidentified, yet the medical history showed complications consistent with a pregnancy that had no prior medical records." James's heart raced. Catherine never had a chance to register her pregnancy with a doctor before she vanished. Could this be it? Could this be the missing piece? Thomas leaned forward, his voice low but clear. "It's very likely that Catherine gave birth before she disappeared. And if so, Olivia, you might be her daughter." The room fell silent, a mix of disbelief, fear, and hope hanging in the air. Olivia's eyes brimmed with tears, the enormity of the revelation overwhelming her. "If I really am Catherine's daughter, why was I abandoned? Why wasn't I found sooner? James, struggling to contain his own surge of emotions, reached across the table, his hand resting gently on Olivia's. We'll find out, Olivia. We'll find out who did this and why. I promise you. Olivia nodded, her face determined but tear-streaked. I've lived with unanswered questions my whole life. If this is truly my past, I need to know everything. In the following days, the investigation took on a new intensity. James and Olivia were no longer just collaborators. They were a father and daughter possibly reunited by fate, yet still separated by the mysteries of the past. As they dug deeper into Olivia's adoption records and Catherine's disappearance, the shadows of an old conspiracy began to emerge, one that seemed determined to keep the truth buried. But James and Olivia were resolute. They would uncover it, no matter the cost. The relentless investigation had taken its toll on both James and Olivia. The search for answers had grown more consuming with each new piece of evidence that hinted at a larger, more sinister plot. It was a cold, rainy morning in New York when Thomas called James, his voice grave and urgent. "Mr. Sullivan, I need you and Olivia to come to my office immediately," Thomas said. "I've uncovered something that changes everything." The anxiety in Thomas's voice was unmistakable, sending chills down James's spine. "We'll be there in 30 minutes, James replied, already grabbing his coat and keys. Thomas's office was filled with stacks of papers and an old corkboard covered in photographs and scribbled notes. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as James and Olivia entered, their expressions tense. Thomas wasted no time. "I found Catherine Sullivan's missing medical records," he said flatly. "They were buried deep in an encrypted database from the old Mount Sinai system, hidden for years." He handed a printout to James, who stared at it, his eyes scanning over the words with a mix of shock and disbelief. "This confirms that Catherine was indeed pregnant when she disappeared," Thomas continued. "She was already in her 3rd trimester." Olivia's eyes were wide with disbelief. "So, it's true? She had the baby before she disappeared? And that baby was me?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "Everything matches. The timeline, the medical records, even the complications described in both your files and Catherine's." James felt his knees weaken, and he reached out for the desk to steady himself. "I've waited 22 years to hear this," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "But why was she never found? Why was Olivia abandoned?" "That's the next part of this mystery," Thomas replied. "I found something else. There are documents that suggest Catherine may have been under duress. The adoption papers were signed with a forged signature, and there were financial transactions leading to offshore accounts tied to someone close to you, James." James's face went pale. Who could do this?" Thomas hesitated, then spoke. "The documents lead back to someone within your family's business. The records are linked to someone who had access to your personal information, including Catherine's. It's your brother, Robert Sullivan." The name fell like a thunderclap. James's eyes blazed with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Robert? No, that's impossible. He would never." "James," Olivia interrupted gently, "we have to consider every possibility, no matter how painful it is." James's voice was strained as he tried to process the revelation. "Robert and I were close after Catherine's disappearance. He helped me cope, even handled parts of the business when I couldn't. Why would he be involved in something like this?" Thomas sighed. "I can't answer the why just yet, but the evidence is undeniable. Robert had both motive and opportunity. He was always second in line for the business, and Catherine's pregnancy threatened to complicate things even more." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, her voice cracking as she spoke. "So, he orchestrated everything? He took Catherine away, then abandoned me at an orphanage?" "It's too early to draw conclusions," James said, his voice breaking. "But we need to confront Robert and find out what he knows. We can't let this lie any longer." That evening, James and Olivia drove to Robert's estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The air was thick with tension as they pulled up to the sprawling mansion, its grandeur now tainted by suspicion. James stepped out of the car, taking a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. A butler opened the door, his expression formal. "Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Bennett," he greeted, showing no surprise. "Mr. Robert is expecting you in the study." "Expecting us?" Olivia whispered to James, confused. I don't like this, James replied, feeling a sense of dread settle over him. As they entered the study, Robert stood by the fireplace, his posture relaxed, a glass of bourbon in hand. He was a man in his late 50s, with the same piercing blue eyes as James, but with a colder, more calculating demeanor. James, Olivia, Robert greeted, his tone casual. I had a feeling you'd come. I assume this is about Catherine? You know damn well what this is about, James retorted, anger simmering beneath his words. We found the records. We know about Catherine's pregnancy and Olivia's adoption. Robert's face remained impassive, but a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, crossed his eyes. And what exactly do you think you know, James? Olivia, unable to contain herself, stepped forward. We know you were involved. You had access to everything, Catherine's information, the adoption papers. You had every reason to want to keep me hidden. Robert took a slow sip of his drink, then set the glass down. You're right, he admitted, his voice eerily calm. I did know about Catherine's pregnancy, and yes, I was involved, but not in the way you think. Then explain, James demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and desperation. Robert's eyes darkened. I didn't want Catherine to disappear. I tried to protect her, but there were others, people with more power than you can imagine, who wanted her gone. They saw her as a threat to the family's legacy. Who? Olivia asked, her voice breaking. Who could be so cruel? Robert's expression softened slightly as he looked at Olivia. You were never meant to be abandoned, Olivia. It was a decision I was forced to make to keep you safe. James's fist clenched. Safe? You call abandoning her safe? It was the only way, Robert insisted, his voice rising. If Catherine's pregnancy became public, it would have torn the company apart. I did what I thought was necessary to protect our family. By tearing it apart from the inside? James shot back, his voice filled with raw pain. Robert's face hardened. You have no idea what I sacrificed, James. I've lived with this burden every day, but I had no choice. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she took a step back. So you're saying you abandoned me to protect the business? Yes, Robert whispered, his voice filled with regret. And it's a decision I'll have to live with for the rest of my life. The confrontation ended in a storm of emotions, anger, regret, and a sense of betrayal that seemed to echo through the halls of the mansion. As James and Olivia left, neither spoke a word. The truth, though partly revealed, was more complex and painful than either had imagined. But there was no turning back now. The path ahead was clear. Uncover the full truth, no matter how dark it might be. The drive back to Manhattan was cloaked in a heavy silence. James gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Next to him, Olivia stared out of the window, her mind a swirl of confusion and heartbreak. The revelations about Robert's role in her abandonment were like a knife twisting in a wound that had never fully healed. When they finally reached James's penthouse, Olivia got out of the car slowly, her legs feeling weak. James followed her up to the apartment, the weight of everything they'd learned seeming to press down on them with each step. As they entered the living room, Olivia collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. James watched her helplessly, unsure of how to bridge the growing chasm between them. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Olivia looked up, her eyes red and filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. For what, James? For not knowing I existed? For not searching harder for Catherine? Or for bringing me into this mess? James flinched, each word hitting him like a blow. For all of it, he admitted. For failing Catherine. For failing you. Olivia's face softened, but only slightly. I don't know if I can forgive any of this, James. Not yet. Neither can I, James responded, his voice heavy with grief. But I promise you, I won't stop until we uncover everything. I owe that to Catherine. And to you. There was a moment of raw honesty between them, the kind that stripped away all pretense. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start. In the days that followed, James found himself overwhelmed by memories of Catherine. He spent long hours alone in his study, poring over old photographs and handwritten letters that Catherine had left behind before her disappearance. One evening, he found himself holding a small locket she used to wear, its delicate chain tangled from years of neglect. He opened it, revealing a small picture of Catherine on one side and a blank space on the other, a reminder of the daughter he never knew. Olivia, on the other hand, struggled to process the revelations. She began isolating herself, distancing from the world around her. Despite James's efforts to reach out, she kept their conversations short, her heart too raw to engage deeply. One cold afternoon, Olivia found herself wandering into Central Park, seeking solace among the trees and the stillness of the lake. She sat on a bench, lost in thought, until a soft voice broke through her reverie. "You seem troubled, miss." Olivia looked up to see an elderly woman with kind eyes sitting beside her. "I am," Olivia admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "Is it love?" the woman asked gently. "No," Olivia replied, her voice barely a whisper. "It's family, the kind that breaks you instead of holding you together." The woman nodded knowingly. Sometimes, the wounds inflicted by family cut the deepest. But facing those wounds is the only way to heal. Olivia felt tears welling up, but she forced a smile. "Thank you," she said quietly, before getting up to leave. As she walked back towards the penthouse, the woman's words lingered in her mind, a small seed of clarity amidst the chaos. That night, as Olivia returned home, she found James sitting alone in the dimly lit living room, staring blankly at an old family photo. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, one that broke through Olivia's walls. "James," she said softly, stepping closer, "I've been thinking, maybe we should talk." James looked up, his eyes tired but grateful. "Yes, I'd like that." They sat down on the couch, both unsure of where to begin. Finally, Olivia spoke. "I don't know how to process all of this," she confessed. "I've lived my whole life believing that my parents didn't want me. Now, to find out that my mother never abandoned me, but was taken from me, it's almost too much." James's eyes filled with tears. "I can't change what happened, Olivia, but I want to make things right as much as I can." "How?" Olivia asked, her voice breaking. "How can we make this right?" "By finding the full truth," James replied. "We need to know what really happened to Catherine. We need to know why Robert made the choices he did. And most importantly, we need to make sure those responsible are held accountable." Olivia nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I want that too. I need it." There was a pause. Then Olivia asked the question that had been haunting her. "James, do you ever feel guilty for not searching harder for Catherine?" James's face twisted with pain. "Every single day," he admitted. "I kept hoping she'd come back on her own, that it was just a misunderstanding. But as the years went by, I started to lose hope. I blamed myself for not being able to protect her." Olivia's voice softened. "It wasn't your fault, James. It's clear that someone went to great lengths to keep her hidden and to hide me. But I should have done more," James insisted, his voice filled with regret. "I should have fought harder, asked more questions, pushed beyond what I was told." Olivia reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "We're both victims in this, James, but we can still fight together." It was the first time Olivia had extended such warmth towards James, a gesture that seemed to fill the room with a fragile sense of hope. The following day, Thomas called with an urgent update. "Mr. Sullivan, I've uncovered more information. Records of transactions from the offshore accounts Robert used. They lead to a shell company connected to a private estate where Catherine was last seen before she vanished." James's heart raced. "Where is this estate?" "It's in upstate New York, a secluded mansion registered under a different name," Thomas explained. "If Catherine was held there, it could be the key to everything." Olivia, listening closely, felt a surge of determination. "Then that's where we need to go," she said firmly. James agreed, a fierce resolve burning in his eyes. "We'll leave first thing tomorrow." As they prepared for the journey, both James and Olivia knew this was more than just a trip. It was a reckoning. It was a confrontation with the past that would demand every ounce of courage they had left. The trip to the mysterious estate in upstate New York had a foreboding air from the start. The rain was relentless, pounding against the windshield of James's SUV as he and Olivia drove along the winding roads. The dense forests lining the path seemed to close in around them, casting eerie shadows across their faces. "This place feels like it's hiding something," Olivia murmured, her eyes fixed on the darkened road ahead. James nodded. "If Catherine was ever here, we'll find something. Anything that can finally give us answers." Their destination was a sprawling mansion, hidden deep in the woods. It had an ominous, neglected look, with ivy creeping up the stone walls and broken windows suggesting years of abandonment. James and Olivia parked a short distance away and approached cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. Thomas had provided a set of skeleton keys and a warning. "Be careful. Whoever operated from this estate is unlikely to welcome visitors." As James unlocked the heavy front door, they stepped inside and were immediately hit by the smell of mold and damp wood. The interior was dark, with heavy curtains blocking out what little daylight remained. "This place feels wrong," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. James turned on a flashlight, illuminating the dusty hallway. "Let's split up," he suggested. "We need to cover as much ground as possible." Olivia nodded, though uneasiness lingered in her eyes. "Be careful," she urged. James moved cautiously through the house, his steps echoing in the empty rooms. Each one seemed more decrepit than the last. Faded wallpaper, shattered mirrors, and furniture covered in white sheets, as if someone had tried to erase all traces of life here. But as he reached a room at the far end of the corridor, he noticed something different. There was a faint, lingering scent, one he recognized from Catherine's favorite perfume, a mix of jasmine and vanilla. He stepped closer, his heart pounding. He noticed a small jewelry box on a dusty table. Inside, there was a single locket, its chain tangled, its metal tarnished. He picked it up, recognizing it instantly as one of Catherine's most cherished possessions. Catherine was here, he whispered to himself, overcome by a flood of emotions. Meanwhile, Olivia was exploring the lower levels of the mansion. She descended a narrow staircase that led to a dimly lit basement. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but she pressed on, determined to find answers. As she reached the bottom, she was struck by the sight before her. A small room with a makeshift bed, old medical supplies scattered across the floor, and chains bolted to the wall. It was a chilling sight, the remnants of a prison that seemed designed to hold someone captive. Olivia's heart raced. This is where they kept her, she realized, her voice trembling. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, her pulse spiking. A man emerged from the shadows, his face obscured by a hood. He moved quickly, grabbing Olivia by the arm with surprising strength. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" the man demanded, his voice cold and menacing. "Let me go," Olivia shouted, struggling to break free. But the man's grip tightened. Just then, James appeared at the top of the stairs, his flashlight casting a harsh beam across the man's face. "Let her go," James yelled, rushing down the steps. The man hesitated, then released Olivia abruptly. "You shouldn't have come here," he warned. "You don't know what you're getting into." "Who are you?" James demanded, stepping protectively in front of Olivia. The man hesitated before replying, "I was one of them. One of those who worked for Robert. I managed this estate. Kept Catherine here." James's face twisted with rage. "Where is she now? What happened to her?" The man's expression darkened. "Catherine was taken away from here. I don't know where she is now, but whoever wanted her gone still has influence. They'll come after you, just like they did with her." Olivia's voice was filled with desperation. "Why was I left in the orphanage? Why didn't you take me too?" The man looked at Olivia with a mix of pity and regret. "Because you were a complication. They needed Catherine to disappear, but a child was something they hadn't planned for. They hoped leaving you behind would keep things quieter." James's voice broke, filled with anguish. "How can you live with yourself?" The man's eyes were hollow. "I don't. I just survive. But you need to understand. There are others involved, people who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets." Suddenly, they heard a car pulling up outside. The man's face paled. "You need to leave, now," he urged. "If they find you here, They'll kill you. James grabbed Olivia's hand. Let's go, he said urgently. They raced out of the mansion and into the forest, the sound of approaching footsteps echoing behind them. Branches scratched their faces, and the darkness seemed to close in around them as they ran, desperate to reach the safety of the car. As they finally reached the vehicle and sped away, Olivia's chest heaved with fear and adrenaline. James, who were those people? Why are they still after us? James's expression was grim. I don't know yet, but I promise you, Olivia, we will find out. Back in Manhattan, James and Olivia tried to make sense of what had happened. The confrontation with the man at the estate had left them with more questions than answers. Olivia's hands still trembled as she sat on James's living room couch, replaying the encounter in her mind. James, what if this never ends? What if there's no way to truly find her? She asked, her voice filled with a mix of fear and doubt. James sat beside her, his gaze steady. It will end, Olivia. We're closer than ever. But we need to be prepared, because whoever's behind this isn't just going to let us uncover the truth. Olivia nodded, a new determination in her eyes. Then we'll have to be stronger than them. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit office far away, a man received a call. He listened intently, his expression growing darker by the second. They found the estate? He asked, his tone icy. Then we need to accelerate the plan. James Sullivan and Olivia Bennett can't be allowed to dig any deeper. He hung up, his face set with grim resolve. The hunt was far from over, and the next move would be more dangerous than any they had faced so far. The dim glow of dawn barely penetrated the fog that enveloped the city streets. James and Olivia sat in the living room, faces etched with exhaustion. The discovery at the estate had intensified their desperation. The unseen forces threatening them seemed to be closing in, their intentions darker and more dangerous than ever. The phone suddenly rang, breaking the uneasy silence. It was Thomas, his voice low and urgent. James, I found something. You both need to come to my office immediately. Is it about Catherine? James asked, hope and dread mixing in his voice. Not exactly, Thomas replied, but it's something big, possibly the link we've been missing. Within the hour, James and Olivia reached Thomas's office. He ushered them inside, his expression grim. On the table lay a stack of documents, hastily gathered and covered with handwritten notes. These are bank records, Thomas began. Offshore accounts, all connected to Robert's business dealings. But there's something else. Transactions that suggest a connection to a powerful group operating in the shadows, linked to your family's enterprise for years. James's eyes narrowed. What kind of group? Thomas hesitated before answering. It's a criminal syndicate that operates globally, dealing in illegal activities, money laundering, human trafficking, even blackmail. The worst part? It seems they were behind Catherine's disappearance. Olivia's face turned pale. So Robert was part of this syndicate? Thomas nodded. Yes, and it's likely that his involvement went deeper than we thought. He wasn't just covering up Catherine's pregnancy. He was trying to protect the interests of the syndicate. James felt a surge of rage. He betrayed his own family to protect criminals? Not just criminals, Thomas corrected. These are people who have the power to manipulate governments, to erase identities, even to orchestrate disappearances. Olivia's voice trembled as she spoke. Then this means they might have moved Catherine elsewhere. She could still be alive. Thomas nodded slowly. It's a possibility, but it also means you're both in more danger than ever. They'll do anything to stop you from uncovering the full truth. James stood abruptly, his voice filled with determination. Then we need to act quickly. What's our next move? There's one more lead, Thomas revealed. A safe house registered under one of the syndicate's shell companies. It's located near the Hudson River, just outside the city. If Catherine was moved recently, she could have been taken there. Olivia's eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and urgency. We need to go there now. The drive to the safe house was filled with a tense, expectant silence. Olivia's hands gripped the seat as they sped along the highway, the rain slashing against the windows. This could be it, James, she said softly. We could finally find her. James's face was set, his eyes focused on the road. I know, but we need to be prepared for anything. They arrived at the location just as dusk settled in. The safe house was a nondescript, two-story building, its appearance unremarkable but surrounded by a chain-link fence and overgrown bushes. "Stay close," James whispered to Olivia as they approached, their steps cautious. Inside, the house was eerily silent, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the stillness. James and Olivia moved carefully from room to room, finding little more than dusty furniture and broken fixtures. Suddenly, Olivia noticed a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. "James," she called quietly. "There's something here." James joined her, pushing the door open slowly. Inside, they found what appeared to be an office, papers scattered across a desk, a computer still humming with power. But it was the bulletin board on the wall that caught Olivia's attention. Tacked onto it were photographs of Catherine, taken over the years. Some were from their early years of marriage, others were more recent, showing her in captivity. Her face pale, her eyes haunted. Olivia gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "She's alive," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "James, she's really alive." James's voice broke as he looked at the images. "We're close, Olivia. We're so close." Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. James turned sharply, spotting a shadow moving quickly down the hallway. "Get down!" he shouted, grabbing Olivia and pulling her to the floor. Gunshots rang out, the sound deafening in the confined space. Whoever was shooting was determined, their aim precise. James and Olivia scrambled for cover behind an overturned table, their hearts pounding. "Stay low," James ordered, his voice urgent. Olivia nodded, trying to control her fear. "Who are they?" "They're the syndicate's enforcers," James replied, his voice tense. "We need to find a way out." As the gunfire momentarily ceased, James spotted a window on the side of the room. "We're going out that way," he said, motioning to Olivia. He helped Olivia climb through the window, then followed her. They landed roughly in the wet grass outside, both of them covered in mud but determined to keep moving. "Run!" James shouted, and they sprinted toward the woods nearby, their footsteps barely audible over the sound of rain and distant sirens. They managed to find a small abandoned shed in the forest, a temporary shelter from the rain. As they caught their breath, Olivia looked at James, her face a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We can't stop now," she insisted. "We're so close. We have to find her." James nodded, his voice filled with resolve. "And we will, Olivia. But we need to be smarter. The syndicate won't hesitate to kill us if we get too close." "Then we need help," Olivia said. "Someone who can protect us while we search." James's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I know someone," he admitted. "An old friend who used to work in intelligence. If anyone can keep us safe, it's him." Olivia nodded. "Then let's find him. We can't let the syndicate win." As they prepared to leave the shed and head back to the city, both James and Olivia knew that the next steps would be even more dangerous. The syndicate had shown its hand, and the stakes were now higher than ever. But their determination had only grown stronger. There was no turning back, not with Catherine's fate hanging in the balance. The urgency of their escape lingered like a bitter taste as James and Olivia returned to Manhattan. By dawn, they had reached James's penthouse, drenched and exhausted, but resolute. James wasted no time dialing a number he hadn't called in years. "It's James Sullivan," he said when the call connected. "I need your help, urgently." The voice on the other end was rough and wary. "It's been a while, Sullivan. I assume this isn't a social call?" "No, it isn't," James admitted. "I'm dealing with something big, dangerous. And I think it's time I called in that favor you owe me." There was a pause before the man responded. "Meet me at the old warehouse on Pier 17 in an hour." James hung up and turned to Olivia. "We're meeting an old contact of mine. His name is Liam Ward, ex-intelligence, and he's someone we can trust." Olivia's face showed a mix of hope and skepticism. "Can he really help us?" "He's one of the few who can," James assured her. "But be prepared. He's not exactly warm and friendly." The warehouse was dimly lit and smelled of rust and seawater. Olivia shivered as they stepped inside, unsure of what to expect. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall man in his late 40s, with short-cropped hair and a piercing gaze. "James," Liam greeted, his voice low and commanding. "So, you finally got yourself in over your head?" "Seems like it," James replied, extending a hand. "Liam, this is Olivia Bennett. She's Catherine's daughter, and possibly my own." Liam's eyes flickered with surprise, but quickly focused on Olivia. "So, you're the reason James is digging into old graves. I've heard a lot about you." "Only recently," Olivia replied dryly. "But I appreciate your willingness to help." Liam nodded. "This isn't just about finding Catherine anymore, is it? You're dealing with the syndicate." "Yes," James confirmed. "We've uncovered enough to know that they're behind everything. Catherine's disappearance, Olivia's abandonment, and the attacks on us. We need to finish this, but we're running out of time." Liam studied them both for a moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder. "I anticipated this might be more than just a rescue mission," he said. "I did some digging of my own." He spread out several documents on a makeshift table. "The syndicate has been using your family's business for years, James. They launder money, move contraband, and even orchestrate political favors through shell companies tied to the Sullivan Empire." James felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to focus. "So, where does Catherine fit into all of this?" Liam pointed to a series of financial records. Catherine stumbled upon one of their operations just before she disappeared. She was trying to expose them, but they got to her first. The pregnancy was their leverage, something they never intended to reveal, but also something they couldn't ignore. Olivia's voice trembled. "So they kept her alive, but hidden?" Liam nodded grimly. "Yes, they used Catherine to maintain control over the Sullivans, knowing she was a crucial bargaining chip. But recently, they've grown paranoid. Word got out that someone was digging too deep. That's why the attacks on you two intensified." "So where is she now?" James demanded. "Where's Catherine?" Liam's face was somber. "I found a location, an abandoned factory on the outskirts of Queens. It's been used as a holding site for high-value captives. It's the last place Catherine was seen." Olivia's eyes filled with hope. "Then we have to go there. Now." "It won't be easy," Liam warned. "The place is heavily guarded. We'll need a plan to get in and out safely." "I don't care about safety," James said, his voice steely. "I care about getting Catherine back." Olivia placed a hand on his arm. "We'll do this together, James. No matter what." Liam looked at them both, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "All right then, let's gear up." The approach to the factory was tense, their breaths visible in the cold night air. Liam had secured weapons and tactical gear, and they moved quietly, each step precise and careful. "Stay behind me," Liam instructed. "There's likely a guard post near the entrance." They reached a rusted gate, its lock broken. Inside, the factory loomed, dark and silent. Olivia's heart raced as they moved through the desolate corridors, every shadow seeming to hide a potential threat. Suddenly, voices echoed from a nearby room. Liam signaled for silence, motioning for James and Olivia to take cover behind a stack of crates. Two armed guards appeared, their conversation casual but tense. "They said to keep an eye on her tonight," one of the guards muttered. "Apparently, someone's coming for her." "Idiots," the other scoffed. "No one's getting in here." "Not with the boss's orders." James's face tightened with fury, but he forced himself to stay calm. "We need to take them out quietly," he whispered. Liam nodded, moving swiftly toward the guards. In one smooth motion, he subdued the first, while James tackled the second. Olivia watched, her breath held, until the guards were unconscious on the ground. "Let's go," Liam urged. They continued deeper into the factory, following the faint sounds of machinery and muffled voices. As they reached a heavy steel door, Liam paused. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "Are you both ready?" James nodded, his hand tightening around the gun. "I've waited too long for this." Liam pushed the door open slowly. Inside was a large, dimly lit room filled with cages and chains, a haunting reminder of the syndicate's cruelty. But it was the figure in the corner that caught James and Olivia's attention. It was Catherine. She was huddled on the floor, her hair disheveled and her clothes torn. Her eyes were closed, but as the door creaked open, she stirred. Her gaze met James's, a mix of fear and disbelief. "James," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Catherine." James rushed to her, tears streaming down his face. He knelt beside her, gently cradling her in his arms. "I'm here. I'm finally here." Olivia stood frozen, her emotions overwhelming her. "Mom," she managed to say, her voice breaking. Catherine's eyes widened as she looked at Olivia, a mixture of shock and recognition dawning. "Olivia? Is it really you?" "Yes," Olivia sobbed, rushing forward. "It's me, Mom. I'm here." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The reunion was filled with tears, apologies, and desperate embraces, the years of separation finally melting away. But the moment was shattered by the sound of footsteps approaching fast. "They're coming," Liam shouted. "We need to move now." With adrenaline pumping, James and Liam helped Catherine to her feet. "Can you walk?" James asked urgently. "I'll manage," Catherine replied, her voice weak but determined. The group made a frantic dash for the exit, the sound of gunfire erupting behind them. Bullets whizzed past, but they pressed on, pushing through pain and fear. As they reached the gate, Liam covered their escape, firing back at the approaching guards. "Go," he shouted. "I'll hold them off." James hesitated, but Olivia pulled him forward. "We can't lose you now, too," she urged. They reached the car and sped away, the factory shrinking in the rearview mirror. Catherine, exhausted and weak, clung to James and Olivia, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "You found me," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "You really found me." James's voice was filled with emotion. "We never stopped looking." But deep down, all three knew that the syndicate wouldn't give up easily. They had found Catherine, but the fight was far from over. The next steps would be the most dangerous yet. Back in James's penthouse, the mood was tense but filled with a fragile sense of victory. Catherine was finally safe, though visibly weak and haunted by years of captivity. Olivia stayed close to her, unable to fully grasp that the woman she had believed lost forever was now sitting right beside her. "It feels like a dream," Olivia whispered, her voice raw. "All my life I wondered if you were out there, if you were still alive." Catherine's eyes were filled with sorrow. "I never stopped thinking about you, Olivia. I thought about you every single day." James, watching them from across the room, felt an overwhelming wave of emotions: relief, guilt, and the burning desire for retribution against those who had torn their family apart. "Now that we have Catherine," he said, his voice firm, "we need to take down the syndicate once and for all. We can't let them keep controlling our lives." Catherine's gaze shifted to James. "You need to be careful. They're more dangerous than you can imagine, James. The man behind it all. He's ruthless. He won't stop until he silences us." "Who is he?" Olivia asked, her voice filled with urgency. "Who's the one pulling all the strings?" Catherine hesitated, then spoke with a mixture of fear and anger. "His name is Victor Rossi. He was once a business associate of Robert's. But when I discovered their dealings with the syndicate, Rossi became the driving force behind my disappearance." James's eyes burned with fury. "Rossi? I should have known. He's been involved in shady deals for years. Rossi saw me as a threat to their empire," Catherine continued. "He used Robert's greed and ambition to execute their plan. But Robert was never the mastermind. Rossi was the real power." Olivia clenched her fists. "Then we need to find Rossi. We can't let him get away with what he's done." Catherine's face showed a mix of fear and resolve. "He'll be expecting us to make a move. He's not just dangerous. He's unpredictable." The next morning, Thomas arrived, his face etched with concern. "I heard about the rescue," he said, glancing at Catherine. "It's good to see you safe, Catherine. But you're not out of danger yet." James nodded. "We know. It's Rossi." Catherine confirmed it. Thomas's expression darkened. "Rossi is one of the most dangerous players in the syndicate. He's built an empire of fear, and he won't let you expose him without a fight." "Then let's give him one," James said. "What's our next move?" Thomas spread out a map on the table, pointing to a location on the outskirts of the city. "Rossi has a fortified mansion here. It's where he conducts most of his operations, and where he's likely hiding crucial evidence. Olivia's eyes lit up with a mix of anger and hope. Then that's where we go. Not so fast, Thomas warned. Rossi's mansion is heavily guarded, with state-of-the-art security. It won't be a simple break-in. Catherine looked at James, her voice resolute. I know Rossi's routines, his patterns. I can help you navigate the mansion, but it won't be easy. He's a paranoid man with deadly instincts. James's face was set with determination. We've come too far to back down now. We'll need a plan. One that's fast, strategic, and leaves no room for error. The preparations for the final confrontation were intense. Thomas secured tactical gear, weapons, and the layout of Rossi's estate. Catherine provided details about secret passages she had overheard during her captivity, and Olivia familiarized herself with the plan, ready to face whatever awaited them. As night fell, James, Olivia, Catherine, and Thomas drove toward Rossi's mansion, their hearts filled with both fear and fierce determination. The mansion loomed ahead, surrounded by high walls and guarded by armed men. Remember, Thomas instructed as they parked a distance away. We have one goal: get in, find the evidence, and expose Rossi. We're not leaving until we have what we need. Catherine's voice was firm. And if we find Rossi, he'll have to answer for everything. They moved silently through the shadows, reaching the outer walls of the mansion. Liam's connections had secured a distraction. A fire alarm that suddenly blared, sending guards scrambling in confusion. Go now, James urged, leading the way through a side entrance. Inside, the mansion was a mix of opulence and cold sterility. Olivia and Catherine stayed close behind James and Thomas as they navigated through the hallways, each step taken with precision and caution. Suddenly, a group of guards appeared, guns drawn. Thomas reacted swiftly, exchanging gunfire as James pulled Olivia and Catherine into cover. Stay down, James ordered, returning fire. The gunfire echoed through the halls, but James and Thomas managed to overpower the guards. We're clear, Thomas announced, but we need to move fast. They reached Rossi's private office, a room filled with expensive artwork and thick metal cabinets. Catherine pointed to a large safe in the corner. That's where he keeps his most sensitive files. It'll have everything we need. Olivia stepped forward, pulling out a small device that Thomas had provided. This will override the electronic lock, she said, her fingers working quickly. The safe clicked open, revealing stacks of files, encrypted hard drives, and a ledger filled with names, transactions, and dates. It was the smoking gun they needed, proof of Rossi's involvement in the syndicate's darkest operations. We've got it, Olivia said, her voice filled with triumph. But before they could react, a cold, menacing voice filled the room. Congratulations, Rossi said, stepping out from the shadows, a gun in hand. You found my little secrets. But I'm afraid none of you are leaving alive. James stepped forward, his own gun aimed at Rossi. It's over, Rossi. We have everything we need to bring you down. Rossi's smile was chilling. You're naive, Sullivan. This isn't just about power. It's about survival. And I've survived far worse than you. Before anyone could react, Rossi fired a shot. The bullet grazed James's arm, but he didn't flinch, his focus unwavering. Enough, Olivia shouted, stepping in front of James. This ends now, Rossi. We're not afraid of you anymore. Rossi's eyes narrowed, but before he could fire again, Catherine raised a hidden gun she had taken from one of the guards. This is for everything you've taken from us, she said, her voice filled with fury. She fired, hitting Rossi in the shoulder. He fell to the ground, his gun clattering away. Thomas quickly restrained him, securing him with handcuffs. It's over, Rossi, he said. You're going to face justice. Rossi's face twisted with rage, but he knew he was defeated. You think this will change anything? He spat. The syndicate is bigger than me, bigger than all of you. James stepped closer, his eyes cold. Maybe, but it's a start. As dawn broke, the group emerged from the mansion, their mission finally complete. Catherine, exhausted but free, turned to James and Olivia. I never thought I'd see this day, she whispered, tears of relief in her eyes. Olivia hugged her tightly. We're free now, Mom. We're finally free. James, his voice filled with emotion, added, and we're going to make sure the world knows what happened. Rossi will pay for everything he's done. But deep down, James, Olivia, and Catherine knew that even though the battle with Rossi was over, the war with the syndicate had just begun. The aftermath of Rossi's arrest rippled through the city like a shockwave. News outlets were flooded with headlines detailing the syndicate's unraveling and the corruption that had infiltrated the highest levels of business and politics. In James's penthouse, the atmosphere was finally calm, but the reality of the ordeal lingered in every corner. Catherine, though physically free, still carried the weight of 22 years of captivity. Olivia remained close to her mother, a mixture of protectiveness and overwhelming relief in her eyes. James entered the room, carrying 3 mugs of coffee. "It's not much," he said with a small smile. "But it's a start." Catherine's face softened as she took the mug. "Thank you, James, for everything. I know I wasn't easy to find." James's voice was filled with sincerity. "I wish I had found you sooner, Catherine. I should have." Olivia, sitting next to Catherine, looked at James. "But you did find her," she said, her voice filled with a rare warmth. "That's what matters now." The 3 sat in silence for a moment, letting the reality of their reunion sink in. It was fragile, but it was real. Over the next few weeks, James, Catherine, and Olivia focused on piecing their lives back together. James worked with law enforcement to expose the syndicate's operations further, determined to dismantle it entirely. His company, sullied by the revelations of corruption, faced a public reckoning, but James was committed to making things right. Catherine, meanwhile, began to adjust to her newfound freedom. The journey was not easy. Nightmares of captivity still haunted her, and the world she returned to was vastly different from the one she had left behind. But Olivia's presence was a constant source of strength. One evening, as Olivia and Catherine sat on the terrace overlooking the city, Catherine turned to her daughter, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never thought I'd get this chance," she said softly, "to see you grown, to know the woman you've become." Olivia's voice was filled with raw emotion. "I never thought I'd get to know my mother. It's been hard, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." They embraced, the bond between them stronger than ever. The day of Rossi's trial arrived, and James, Olivia, and Catherine attended, determined to see justice served. The courtroom was packed, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Rossi, his arrogance stripped away, sat in the defendant's chair, flanked by a team of lawyers. The prosecutor presented damning evidence: bank records, testimonies from former associates, and Catherine's own statement about her captivity. As she testified, Catherine's voice was steady but filled with pain. "The syndicate tried to erase me," she said, her eyes never leaving Rossi's. "But I survived. And now, I'm here to make sure no one else suffers the same fate." Rossi's expression remained cold, but there was no mistaking the defeat in his eyes. Olivia's hand found James's, squeezing it tightly as Catherine finished her testimony. "She's so strong," Olivia whispered, pride evident in her voice. "Yes, she is," James replied, his eyes filled with admiration. The verdict was clear: guilty on all counts. Rossi was sentenced to life in prison, his empire dismantled and his influence shattered. As they left the courthouse, Catherine turned to James and Olivia. "It's over," she said, her voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. "Really over." James nodded. "It is. But now, it's time for a new beginning." In the weeks that followed, James announced a major restructuring of his company, pledging transparency and dedicating a significant portion of his wealth to organizations that supported victims of human trafficking. It was his way of finding redemption, not just for himself, but for the family he had nearly lost. Olivia, inspired by the journey they had endured, decided to open a foundation focused on helping adopted children find their biological families. Catherine stood by her, ready to support her in any way she could. "Are you sure about this?" Catherine asked one day as they walked through the newly rented office space for the foundation. Olivia nodded, her face determined. "This is what I was meant to do. I want to help others find the answers I spent my whole life searching for." Catherine smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "I think you're going to change lives, Olivia." On a crisp autumn morning, the three of them gathered at a small park near Central Park, one of Catherine's favorite spots before her disappearance. It was a quiet celebration of life and survival. They sat on a bench, watching the leaves fall, their hearts lighter than they had been in years. James broke the silence. "I never thought I'd get a second chance to be a father," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Olivia's eyes softened as she looked at him. "And I never thought I'd have a father," she replied. "But here we are." Catherine reached for both of their hands, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. "We may have lost years, but we found each other. And that's what truly matters." As they sat together, the past's darkness seemed to recede, replaced by a hopeful, unspoken promise. It was a new chapter, one built not on fear and deception, but on love, redemption, and the strength of family. The story had come full circle, a family torn apart by secrets, now united by truth. The scars would remain, but so would the bond that had finally brought them back together. For James, Olivia, and Catherine, the journey was far from perfect, but it was finally theirs to share. And that was enough.